welcome everyone. Welcome, Paula. I'm just so excited to be here with you. It feels like it's been a long time since our December get-together. I can't tell you how excited I am to have Paula here. She's a senior literary agent, writer of fiction, nonfiction, memoir, and an editor, and spent a long time as an acquiring editor. So I think we're all going to learn a lot when we get started. Before then, though, I want to introduce myself, provide a little bit of context. While some of you have been here for all of my webinars since April 2020, others of you, this is your first time. If you've been here since the beginning, yay on you. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome to all of you. I started these webinars because all of my in-person events got canceled at the beginning of the pandemic, and I missed spending time with writers. And I can't thank you enough for spending this time with me. You are my tribe, and I just want you to know you're more than welcomed, you're valued. Thank you for being here. I've given you an update on New York City each time. And I started in April 2020 by describing the city as dystopian. It was really bad. It was very frightening and dark and scary. We're in such better shape now, especially since in the last week or so, the new wave of cases has gone down. And so I hope you're safe and well and vaccinated and boosted, and yay. Each month, I also show you a photo of a garden, usually from my little Tudor City greens, the two little parks nearby where I walk almost every day. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to show you. This photo is an ornament on the Christmas tree that is still up. That's odd, right? The garlands on the fence are gone, but the Christmas tree is still up. And every day when I walk by it, I look for this ornament. It is a variation on a dream catcher. And as you may know, a dream catcher is a sacred Native American artifact, often placed over babies' cradles or cribs as a symbol of good luck, safety, good wishes. And I should mention that some folks feel that its place in the broader culture is inappropriate appropriation. And I wanted to acknowledge that sentiment. To me, though, it's a dream catcher is a wonderful idea, and so very appropriate for us to consider at the start of a new year. Some of you make New Year's resolutions. I don't. What I do is dream. I dream about what I want to accomplish this year, and I use those dreams to determine my goals for the year. I wanted to share this approach. Let's all find within ourselves a dream catcher. So those dreams we dare to dream don't dissolve, disappear, fade away, disperse. Look at all those D words. Here's 4 more. These are the 4 that I use to describe myself as a writer. I'm determined, dedicated, diligent, and deadline driven. However you think of your goals, remember my neighborhood's ornament of a dream catcher, and don't let your dreams float away. Catch them and hold them fast. Because I love spending time with you, and because so many of you have told me that the webinars have value for you, we have scheduled more dates. And for that, I'll turn to this slide. So we have 3 new webinars. I think we announced these last month, February 12th, March 12th, and April 23rd. Raise the stakes for your protagonist and yourself. That's interesting, right? Got to belly up to the bar to be a writer with a voice. We'll talk about that. And your protagonist, of course, increasingly difficult obstacles, escalating conflict. We'll talk about that. Subplots aren't secondary, and writing synopses and queries. We'll touch on that today, of course, but I've already begun the research to put together this presentation, and we'll see what works and what you should not do. You know that I have begun, some of you know, Mystery Mastermind virtual workshops, and they're all sold out as of now. I expect to add a couple more in the spring. There's the list for the insiders list so that you get first dibs, because there's only 5 slots. We meet for 6 sessions. Right now I'm running how to write your cozy mystery together and how to write a thriller together. So yay. Books. Jane Austen's Lost Letters out, and look at the reviews. Publishers Weekly called it beguiling and said Ms. Austen would approve. Isn't that? And USA Today named it one of 5 books not to miss. Yay. Paperback of Ornaments of Death is out. And that's it. So there we go on me and what I'm up to. You know I write fiction and nonfiction. You know my craft books have won the Agatha Award. You know I'm our contributing editor for Writer's Digest magazine. And I'm a member of the full-time faculty at Lehman College and a mentor in Western Connecticut State University's MFA, low residency MFA in creative and professional writing, a wonderful program. And I'm the chair of the Bona Award, the Black Orchid Novella Award, put out in partnership between the Wolf Pack, the literary society that celebrates all things Nero Wolfe, and Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, where my short fiction has been published. And it's an annual event, no entry fee. Got to have a crime, can't use the characters. I'm sure John is posting the link. If you navigate to the Literary Awards, you'll find all the rules there. We welcome your submissions. If you win, you get $1,000. If you can get to New York in December, we fetch you at our annual banquet. And welcome for that. And of course, I do loads of workshops like this virtually now, but at association meetings and MFA residencies and so on. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce Paula. Paula Munier is a senior agent and director of storytelling and content for Talcott Notch Literary, and the USA Today best-selling author of the Mercy Carr Mysteries. A Borrowing of Bones, the first in the series, was nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award and named Dogwise Book of the Year. Blind Search also won the Dogwise Award. The Hiding Place appeared on both Lisa Holstein's and Julianne Love's Best of 2021 lists. They are extremely influential and well-respected bloggers. The Wedding Plot debuts in July 22. Paula credits the hero dogs of Mission Canine Rescue, her own rescue dogs, and a deep love of New England as her series' major influencers. Paula has also written popular books on writing: Plot Perfect, The Writer's Guide to Beginnings, Writing with Quiet Hands. She's also written a memoir, isn't she incredible? Fixing Freddie, and Happier Every Day. She lives in New England with her family, and Bear, the Newfoundland Retriever Rescue, Bliss, the Great Pyrenees Australian Cattle Dog Rescue, Pandemic Puppy Blondie, a Malinois, I think, rescue, much like Elvis in her books, and Ursula the Cat, a rescue Torby Tabby who doesn't think much of the dogs. I must say, you have the best job titles. When you were acquiring editor at a major publisher, your title at the time was Chief Innovation Officer. I mean, really, what a great title. And now you are the Director of Storytelling and Content. What does that mean?
Well, it means that, no matter what you're selling, whether it's a book or a play or a movie or a product of any kind, you need to tell a story. And so storytelling has become, commercials are little stories, right? Everything's a little story now. People want to hear stories. And so storytelling has become the premier way of communicating ideas and characters and plots and virtually everything we see around us now becomes a story. And so the question is, how do you find the story that people want to hear? And how do you make that story the most compelling?
And so, is what you're saying that you work with authors in an editorial capacity to do this?
Yes, I mean, all our authors all our authors are people who are telling stories one way or another. And the question is, how can you tell the most compelling story, right? You want to tell a compelling story. And I think that's something that writers struggle to do, and we live in a 140 character world. Stories have to really grab your attention quickly. And so the more you know about story, the better stories you can tell.
And this is a nice segue into my next question, which is we hear that agents are always looking for good books. What makes a book good?
What makes a book good? Well, I was thinking about this
Good.
question, what makes a good book? And I think what makes a book good is really the only rule in writing is keep the reader reading. But what makes a good book is all the other rules support that rule, right? So I think what makes a book good is first of all, a really good idea that the book is actually about something, and a character we really care about, a character we're willing to spend $30 and 15 hours of our lives following through their journey, right? And a character that's really put through his or her paces, right? That you challenge that character, and we can relate to that character and their journey and hope that in the end that they meet those challenges and become better versions of themselves. Right? Now sometimes they become
Oh, okay. So we want the character to have a transformation,
Mhm.
but transformation not to a new thing, but a better version of themselves.
Yes, I mean, I think that's what most readers are looking for. Now, we do see stories where we watch a character devolve into a lower version of themselves, the Breaking Bads of the world, right? The Godfathers, right? The tragedies, right? Shakespeare was great at this. You see people devolve all the time, right? But those are tragedies. And as an agent, I can just tell you they're harder to sell.
They're harder to sell.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. People want affirmation.
They do. They want, I think, especially in troubled times, people want to see how characters meet those challenges and do not become less humane in the process, but become
Oh
more
boy,
humane in the process.
interesting.
I think what readers are really looking for now is heart.
Heart.
Yeah.
Can you give us an overview of the current publishing marketplace? What's selling well? You've already touched on that. What's selling well and what isn't?
Well, right now, I mean, this all speaks, the pandemic changed everything. People are reading more than ever. A lot of people have rediscovered their love of reading, but they're reading brand names. They're reading the writers they already know and love to a large extent. So backlist sales are way up. Backlist are all the books published before. Frontlist are the books being published now. So the books being published now have been driven. The ones that have succeeded, a lot of them, did not succeed during the pandemic because of all the reasons retail businesses have suffered, right, during the pandemic. But brand names have done well. Big ideas have done well. Romance from March 2020 to March 2021, the worst of we keep saying the worst of the pandemic.
Right.
But sales of romance novels jumped 28%.
Wow.
Yeah, people escaping into romance. Now, those are the people who like to escape into romance. And there are people who like to escape, who feel better by thinking, oh, it could be worse, which is why I know, which is funny. But those people they're reading horror. Horror is having a big moment now. They're reading science fiction. They're reading dystopian. There's a huge market for short stories now, not so much in, print, but producers are calling, looking for short stories to make into movies. So there's short stories, there's horror, there's romance, there's traditional mysteries, and there's books that make you feel good, right? Whether it's it could be anything like or hopeful somehow, like Matt Haig's The Midnight Library, right? There's this idea that we have multiple lives to live, and how can we live the best life, right? Our best life now. So I think those kinds of books are doing really well. And so I think if you think about that, I just wrote a post for careerauthors.com about writing with heart, because everyone's looking for those stories that make us feel something and feel good.
Do you think this is going to last?
I don't know. I mean, publishing is like any other business, it's cyclical. Right now, there's a wonderful demand for stories by writers from marginalized communities. And that's great because it hasn't necessarily been that way in the past. And I hope it lasts, but you never know. I mean, I think that readers come to a book because they want a certain kind of reading experience, right? This is an
Yeah.
experience they're looking for. That's why they prefer typically one genre after another over another, because they're looking for that reading experience that a romance gives you or that a mystery gives you, right? And so I think that as the world around us changes, we look for different kinds of reading experiences, perhaps, or we default to the ones that give us comfort, right? That we love already.
Yes, and most readers, I'm extrapolating on my experience, but I suspect this is true. Most people don't read in just one genre. It's like cozy mystery readers also read thrillers and also read an occasional romance and have been seen with poetry in their hands and a literary novel.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true?
Yes. I mean, what sells books has not changed. It's word of mouth. So if your favorite best friend or a book club member tells you read this book, no matter what genre it is, odds are you'll read it.
Yeah. Or at least start it, right?
Right. Yes.
Is it the consolidation that has occurred in traditional publishing, big five, maybe to become big four?
Yeah.
Is it harder to sell? Or are there
it's
more
harder to sell.
opportunities?
It's harder to sell the big five.
That's what I mean. Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but there are other publishers sort of stepping into the void. So all kinds of publishers. I mean, look at a company like Blackstone, which was known for audio. It's now doing print, now doing lots of book to film. Just hired Brendan Deneen, who did book to film at Macmillan, and then at A Media, and now he's at Blackstone. So there are a lot of companies stepping in, right? And I think that's great.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of opportunities. Are these newer companies or newly reinventing themselves companies working exclusively through agents, or can authors query them directly?
It depends on the company. There are still some companies like Kensington that you don't need an agent, right, to submit your stories. A lot of romance imprints, you don't need an agent. It all depends on what you're writing,
Having said that, I want to correct Paula's wording. You may not be required to have an agent to submit. You always need an agent. Agents protect your rights. They will get you more money. They will preserve more of those rights. They know things about foreign sales and other media sales that you probably would have no way of knowing. Correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I have an agent, right?
Yeah, and that's an important point. A lawyer shouldn't represent himself. You don't represent yourself. You have an agent.
Absolutely not. No. No. Yeah, you really do need an agent. I mean, it's easier for everyone. It's easier for the publisher. It's easier for the editor. It's easier for the writer. It's easier for everyone if there's that middleman who really can not just negotiate the contract and sell the book, but help you meet your long-term goals as a writer and negotiate whatever. Maybe you hate your cover, maybe whatever it is. That's what agents are for, to step in and say and to plead your case for you, so that
yes,
you can be the good cop always as the writer, and the agent can be the bad cop.
Yeah, it's perfect, right? Something you said just now made me think of another issue. Let's say I go to a small press directly and they make me an offer. At that point, is it kosher for me to go to an agent?
Only if you haven't agreed to anything yet.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
they've made me an offer. I haven't even looked at the contract. I
right.
can now go to an agent and say,
Yes,
take this
because
over.
yeah, absolutely. Because small publishers, and I say this, it's a generalization, but it holds up oftentimes. They often have the worst, most egregious contracts. And so you do not want to sign anything and you don't want to agree to anything because, if you get an offer from a publisher, no matter what publisher it is, you just say, oh, isn't that wonderful? I'll get back to you once I talk to my agent. Even if you don't have an agent, you find somebody, it's like going to a bank when you don't need a loan. It's easy to get the loan, right? Same thing with with an agent. It's easy to get an agent when you've already got an offer in your hand, right? You just don't want to agree to anything because then the agent can do nothing for you.
Right. Good. That's excellent. Um, you've had success as an author of fiction, nonfiction, and memoir. Which genre is your favorite?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think I feel the greatest sense of accomplishment when I finish a novel because it's the hardest for me. I think that's probably why. I,
Yes.
I was a reporter for a long time, so nonfiction, I sort of knew how to do that, right? And you were talking about dreaming earlier, which I love that, talking about dreaming. I always think that nonfiction is thinking on paper, writing is thinking on paper, but writing fiction is dreaming on paper.
Oh,
If
mm,
and so it's harder for me because you have to sort of allow yourself, it's nonfiction, it's facts, and then maybe it's insights, and other things, but you don't have to dream it up, make it up out of whole cloth. And so that's the challenge and the joy, but also a struggle for me because I really always admire visual artists who seem to just have a plug. They just plug into their subconscious, and I don't have a plug, or if I do, it's not working. I have to, I have to sort of
well,
relax
it's
into it.
interesting that I would say I find nonfiction harder. My craft books are the hardest things I've ever had to write because I read almost 200 books for each one, and I had to analyze them, seeking out patterns, and then I had to figure out what buckets those patterns actually go to and
Right.
how to connect the dots. But that's hard, that took brain power, in a way that I was not used to.
Right. Well, that's true. And I think, you started off in fiction. So you had to make what is in some ways an unconscious process conscious, right? To study it.
Yes,
And I went the opposite way. I wrote nonfiction first, and then as an acquisitions editor, I learned the mechanics of storytelling. So I knew that, my challenge
yes.
was to let go of that and dream on paper.
Such an interesting point. Um, would you share your do's and don'ts for querying agents? And I'm asking this sort of in two ways: agents in general, and you in particular, if anyone would care to approach you, which I know you're closed to general queries.
Right, right. Well,
So
generally,
explain why you're closed and what to do and so on.
right. Well, I have a full stable of writers. I don't sign that many new clients, although I'm always looking for new clients. And while I'm closed to unsolicited queries, if I meet you somewhere like here with Jane, then if you put in the subject line, Jane Cleland, then webinar, then I will look at your query. So I do take queries from people I meet, whether it's online or in person, because that's a different kind of thing. That said, the first thing you need to go do is research your agents, know who does what. It's very easy now because half the agents are online, especially on Twitter. You can see what they're looking for. You can go to Publishers Marketplace and see who's selling what to whom. You can join your genre association and get a newsletter that tells you who sold what to whom. And then you look at their website, and they have very particular requirements for queries. And so for every agent, just follow the instructions on their website. Sometimes they use query managers, sometimes you approach them directly, whatever it happens to be. But do follow directions, because if you don't, then that already tells us something about you. And it's a red flag to us, like, uh-oh, they're not going to listen to their publisher's directions either. So that's bad. And then I would say, it's sales copy, right? That's what it's a different kind of writing. And try to figure out what the selling points of your story are, not what you think your story is about, but what the marketplace would relate to. So that's a kind of a different
I
thing.
want to jump in because you just said something I think so important, and it's a differentiation in my mind between plot and story. Story is a broader, overarching theme, whereas plot is the series of incidents
Mhm.
that bring that to fruition, to life. So what you're saying is, don't talk about plot. I was talking plot is the kiss of death. Talk about story. Is
Right.
that consistent?
Yes, yes. And talk about, what makes this the book for now and what makes you the writer to write it, what the selling points are of the story. And then don't waste your subject line. Too many people waste their subject line. A lot of agents don't read all those queries we get. Some intern I know a lovely intern reads them and goes through them, right, and picks out the ones if they're not from people we you know requested queries or material from. And yet we all of us scroll through our emails, see what's there, and often all you see is the subject line. So if it just says agent query, it doesn't know you're good. But if it says agent query, gaslight goes high tech, or, you know, supernatural mystery, and you just happen to know that I am right now looking for supernatural mysteries because you were paying attention on manuscript wish list or something, that subject line becomes a headline of sorts, and you can get an agent's attention. You can get past the end run of the interns. You can get past that if you use that subject line as a headline.
Fabulous. How long should a query be?
I think they should be the shorter the better, although a lot of people have a really hard time um, pitching a story. It's kind of like, think of it as a trailer for your book, like a movie trailer. The highlights, the character, what the character is facing, right? What's the big story question of the book, and what's special about your character? My queries are maybe, well, I always say if I can't sell a book, if I can't pitch a book in 50 words, I can't sell it. And I can't sell it to Hollywood unless it's 10 words. Hollywood doesn't read, so they 10 words tops, right? But
Holy mackerel.
yes, most query letters are maybe say 150 words long. And then I always think you should have a little bio at the bottom, and the bio needs to give you, the agent, a sense of who you are and what about you informs the work. If anything professionally or personally informs the work, that speaks to your ability to tell that story like no one else.
Fabulous. Tell us a little bit about your writing process. Specifically, do you have a writing schedule and do you keep to it? How many minutes or hours at a sitting? Do you write longhand or on a computer? And let's start there because I see you already.
Well, I'm just
dying
laughing
a thousand deaths.
because I know you, Jane, and I know how good you are about keeping a schedule and writing in between classes, and I don't do anything I'm supposed to do. So, I started off as a reporter, and as a reporter, you went out, you talked to people, you asked questions, you did your research, you came home, you came back to the office, you sat down in front of the computer, and you just wrote the story, and then it went to press. I mean, that was it. So, nonfiction, I write on the computer. Right. And nonfiction, I have, I know what the idea is, and I know I've broken that idea down into sections that make sense and ordered it. And it's a fairly straightforward process for me. Fiction is different. So fiction, I tend to write longhand first because it's a way for me to get in touch with my subconscious. And that's what automatic writing is. People like Julia Cameron, morning pages, that's you're getting in touch with your subconscious.
With the
Right.
dream that you're putting on paper.
Exactly. It's easier to dream with a pen and paper than it is with a computer, right?
What kind of paper do you use?
I have all these kinds of pretty notebooks. But now I got this iPad Pro Max, new, with an Apple Pencil. that's beautiful, right? And I can just write in notes and then it changes it into text for me. It's awesome. So I'm losing a step there because normally, but I still have to pretty it up and edit it, but that's usually my first editing job is from longhand to the computer, right? To Word.
So now that you're doing this, are you finding you still have to do that extra draft? Or because when you would type it in from your longhand, I presume you would be making changes.
Yeah, but I do that. I just can't stop editing. So, I mean, every day when I start, I try to read at least, Hemingway used to read the book from the beginning all the way up to get back into the story. And I tend to do that until you're like a couple hundred pages in, but then I read at least 50 pages before and I edit as I go. So I'm always sort of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, always editing and editing and editing. So by the time I get to the end, the first act is usually in really good shape. Middle is kind of, and then act 3, I just tend to barrel towards the finish line so that I have more work to do, but I'm editing all along as I go.
So you just talked about a plot approach of 3 acts, which I do not use. I use my plotting roadmap, which generally has 4 major sections. And it could be analogous as in Act 1, Act 3, and a longer Act 2 with 2 sections in it. So
Right.
It may be comparable, but it's just not how my brain thinks. What do you find harder, plotting or characterization?
Well, that's an interesting. I mean, I was always very intimidated by plot, which is why I never wrote a mystery. I always wanted to be a mystery writer, never wrote a mystery. And then I wrote a book on plot and thought, okay, you wrote a book on plot. Now be able
to do
mystery.
this.
Yes, walk the talk, girlfriend. So I sat down and plotted. I followed my own advice and plotted a mystery. So I tend to have an idea, right? And then I tend to have beginning, middle, end, which that's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 to me, beginning, middle, end. And then I sit down, I have my big plot points, which are my scenes that I know what they are. And then I kind of sit down with index cards and I write the scenes that take us from one plot point to the next. And then I try to aim for at least 60 scenes because that's basically a novel, a minimum of 60 scenes. And then I just start, and it may change over time, but I have plotted it out, and it usually does change by the end, but I have a roadmap to follow.
Well, folks who have been to my webinars know that I'm working on a standalone. And I know, it's been 4 years, Paula. And I was on my 48th draft, sent off 80 pages, finally, nearly killed me. I've restructured it, reframed it, regenred it so many times, but I got the idea. I sent it off to my first reader who got my feedback just a couple of days ago. So I'm now officially on my 49th draft. And he pointed out some major, I'm so weak, relatively speaking, on characterization that even when I think I've really beefed it up, I haven't. When you write an incident and it's not working, there's one of 2 problems. The incident isn't working, or you have not sufficiently generated character motivation to explain why that incident, or to justify, to clarify why that's a logical thing for that person to have done. And that's where that bridge was missing. So I now have a revision plan for how I'm going to approach it. And it was brilliant because so I envy your clarity in being able to plan it out that way with equal attention to the character and the plot. And I just think that's yay. But I explain this because I don't want the folks who are here to be thinking that if it's not so seamless, they can't figure it out. 49 drafts and you too will be closer.
Oh, but I still have drafts. Don't get me wrong. And I have a wonderful editor who's been very good to me. And for me, characters come to life when I hear them talking to me and to each other.
Yes. That's interesting. That makes sense. So here's going to be my last question, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. And I see there's a boatload. and I'll just announce right now that we typically, we call the webinar from 1 to 2. We go to 2:15 if need be,
Sure.
and I suspect we will. But I know already that some of you will need to bow out at 2, and so we understand. But do stay for answers to your questions. My last one is, Paula, do you ever suffer from writer's block? And if so, what do you do?
I do sometimes. I did, particularly with this latest book, which comes out in July, because my father died unexpectedly, and I just couldn't bring myself to do. I was kind of numb. I was just sort of slogging. This past year, 2021, was a slog for me. He died in late February, and so I was really struggling because my editor was and publisher was very sympathetic, and they pushed it out, my due date out a little bit for me, but I knew I had to do something, and usually research gets me out. I just research or take a field trip somewhere, that's going to be in the book, or, that, because I love that part of it. It's the reporter in me. I love that part. And that usually gets me out, but that wasn't working this time. And so I talked to Ellie Griffiths. I don't know if you know Ellie Griffiths. She writes a wonderful Ruth Galloway series, and she's won all kinds of awards for her standalone. She's a great writer, and she's a lovely person. And she writes mysteries under Ellie Griffiths, but she originally wrote women's fiction under Domenica De Rosa, which is her real name. And we were talking about this, and she was expressing her condolences. And I said, yeah, I just can't. She goes, well, after my father died, I just wrote a book about him. And so I thought, so I just wrote my dad, the Colonel, into this book. And that solved the problem for me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it gave me a way to honor him, but it also made me excited about writing. It gave me a reason to write the book, right?
Yes, that's great. And that's a lovely story.
Yeah.
John, to you.
Okay, we have a long list of questions here. However, a lot of them are asking specifically about market trends for genres. So could we do kind of like a lightning round sort of thing? I mention a genre, you say, hot, not, a few words sort of thing?
Sure. Oh, we'll give it a try. Go ahead.
Okay. So people want to know about middle grade mysteries. Middle grade
Is and continues to be very popular. Publishers are looking for middle grade. Middle grade, remember, readers read up. So make sure that you're really know what middle grade is these days, right? It's not what you think middle grade is any more than YA is. So middle grade is hot and continues to be hot.
How old should the protagonist be, Paula?
Well, middle grade, it's like 8 to 10-year-olds are reading about 10 to 12-year-olds, right?
And in YA?
Well, there's younger YA, which is, say 14 to 16, and older YA 16 to 18. And who's reading that? Kids like to read up. So the 12-year-olds are reading about the 14-year-olds, and the 14-year-olds are reading about the 16-year-olds, that sort of thing. If you're writing YA, first person, angst. It's all about angst and raw emotion, They're teenagers.
They're all issue driven, right?
Exactly. And they're completely self-absorbed. So, it's I, right? And everything's the end of the world. That's what you need to really milk that, because that's how they feel. And they're coming to those stories to read about kids like them.
Yes. And once you get into things like traditional mysteries, where my readers, for example, tend to be over 40, they want to read down.
Right.
They want a protagonist who's in her 30s.
Right, exactly.
So. Okay. How about historical fiction? What's the market for historical fiction looking like? Historical
fiction is hard. So you have to be smart. This is where the idea comes in. If you look at, there's 2 new books. One was Laurie Raider Day's Death at Greenway, which she took this idea. She realized that during the war, World War II we're talking about, kids were brought from London, they left the Blitz, right? And they actually stayed at Agatha Christie's house, Greenway. And she took that fact and wrote a mystery around it. And that was such a good idea. And it was a person we all know and love, Agatha Christie, right? Mysteries. That was a great idea. So same thing with Mariah Fredericks. Her new book is The Lindbergh Nanny, and I'm sure that will do very well because it's got a very famous. It's about a very not a famous person, but someone related to a very famous thing that we all know about. So if you're writing historical fiction, you really have to make sure that you're building it around an idea that's big enough because the competition is fierce. It's hard.
Great.
Okay. How about amateur spy thrillers?
Well, they're having a comeback. Spy thrillers are having a comeback, certainly. And if you look at something like The Thursday Murder Club, which Steven Spielberg is making into a movie, people, by Richard Osman, it's hilarious, and it's kind of an amateur spy thriller. The second one certainly is an amateur spy thriller. So again, you just have to have a strong idea. That whole series is built around this idea that there's a retired MI5 agent at a nursing home, and she galvanizes her favorite friends, the oddballs there, and they solve these crimes. And it's full of charm. It's British. He's British. It's full of charm, but it's also hilarious. And so, if you can do that, again, I think charm is also underrated. Lee Child and I had a conversation about that once, about how charm was underrated. I mean, even Jack Reacher has a certain charm, and writing needs a certain charm. And so be sure to milk that, because that's a selling point if you write with charm. You're charming readers.
Okay. And then multiple people asked, if you write in two very distinct genres, does that mean you need two agents?
Well, hopefully you have an agent who represents both genres. I mean, I have lots of clients who write in different genres. I will, as a caveat, say that sometimes you have to write in a couple different genres before you find your sweet spot. And that's when you get published, when you find the sweet spot where your talent meets the marketplace. That's what you're looking for, that were a Venn diagram. Your talent, the marketplace, where do they meet? Right. And so if you succeed in one genre, they're going to want you to keep on writing in that genre to consolidate your success as a writer. Then you can do whatever you want. But you don't want to be too much of a genre dilettante, because you want to build a readership. And not all readers read cross genres. So you can't. And that's why a lot of writers who write in several genres have pen names, because they don't want readers who love Nora Roberts. They don't want to annoy or anger all those readers who then go to J.D. Robb and don't like it because that's not their kind of thing. And then they feel like they've been cheated. That's why she has pen names. So think about that.
Okay. Someone asks, is the affirmation for character betterment a distinctly American wish or something that applies universally?
Very good question. Certainly European and UK publishers they're more cynical, just as they tend to be. Americans, national character, right? It used to be the optimistic. I don't know what the hell happened, but optimistic American. And my daughter lives in Europe, and so I travel there a lot. And all my favorite writers, like Anne Cleese, she'll say, "Oh, that's so American," meaning it's so optimistic, as opposed to your European, sort of more cynical.
They would say realistic. They would call themselves realistic, not cynical.
Yes, exactly.
It's a uniquely American view that their realism is cynical.
Right, exactly. So, but that said, you can write unlikable narrators. You can write unhappy stories. I mean, I always say there are two kinds of unhappy stories. Okay. There's, pardon my French, life is shit, and we may as well slit our wrists and call it a day. And there is, life is shit, but it's all we've got, so let's make the most of it. You can sell the latter. Selling life is shit, let's slit our wrists and call it a day, very difficult to sell. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay. Someone wants to know, in terms of editing, what do publishers do and not do now in terms of assisting you with, say, developmental editing or copy editing?
Okay, so Say that again. Developmental editing versus copy editing. What's the
What
difference?
what do
No.
publishers do and not do now in terms
Oh.
of developmental or copy editing?
Okay, well, okay. So the book has to be in good enough shape for them to buy. But and I heard one agent say that he could only publishers wanted material that was 95% there, so he could only represent you if you were 90% there. So I think it's probably a little lower, more like 80, 90% there. But that said, this idea that publishers don't edit anymore is also not true. Good publishers do edit, and you're lucky if you have a good editor, because it will totally, raise your game. I mean, it's very good for you. That said, developmental editing is something that you should, especially if it's first novel, you should invest. I always think it's a good idea to invest in developmental edit. God knows I have, to make sure you hit your marks, right? In terms of plot and character. As far as copy editing goes, you should know how to copy edit yourself, take an online class or hire a copy editor to show you what to do, because it's kind of like, if you need a lot of copy editing, that's like showing up at a job interview in dirty clothes. I mean, you should know how to clean up your own prose. You should learn. But most publishers do both. You send in your manuscript to your editor, and the editor, if there are any developmental issues, you address those, right? And then
let us just pause for a moment and say, generally, it's a 9-page single-spaced letter,
yes,
filled with editorial changes.
Right.
And you don't get typically you get half your money when you sign the contract, and the other half when they accept the manuscript. Until you make those 9 pages of single-spaced changes, they're not accepting the manuscript.
And it can be, those 9 pages can be everything to, you use this word 430 times, get rid of that word, to this character doesn't work, this scene doesn't work, this act doesn't work. I mean, big picture. But the best editors, they don't miss a trick.
And then once the manuscript's been accepted, then it goes to copy editing, and that's continuity and correctness and fact checking.
Right.
And then it goes to the proofreader, grammar person, and that's during the typesetting stage.
Right.
And that's all paid for by the publisher.
Right.
But
I always tell people, if you get a book, if you get your first book contract with a good publisher, and you are in effect getting a master class in writing and editing on their dime, because your book will be so much better when it comes out the other end of the sausage machine.
Absolutely. But in terms of development editing, I just want to endorse what Paula says. When I say I'm sending it to my first reader, this is someone I pay. I mean, this is not a friend doing me a favor. This is an expert in my genre who tells me the truth with detailed notes and recommendations. And I don't know how people succeed as career authors without that kind of clarity.
Yeah.
And it's in any occupation, you hire experts.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
John, back to you.
Okay. There was a few requests that wanted to know if you could display your event slide from the introduction one more time, so they could get dates and times and such before
Sure, absolutely.
everything ends here. So if we wanted to put that up, I'll spotlight you for a minute while we
Well, there you go. I think it's
answer
showing,
a couple
right?
questions here.
I don't think you need to spotlight me.
Okay. Let's see.
Oh.
There we go. And someone wanted to know, if you go directly to a publisher and they express interest, what is the next step you would consider in finding an agent?
Okay, well, what you do is you call any agent you ever met or email them or whatever and say that you've had an offer from a publisher. Again, don't agree to any terms with that publisher. Just say, thank you very much, I'll get back to you after I talk to my agent. And then that kind of puts them on notice that you have an agent. Even if you don't, you will. You're right. And then you see what the agent has to say, and hopefully you get an agent, and then the agent can negotiate the terms and then the contract based on the terms. Because there's the general terms, which is like the advance and the big sub rights, and then there are the contract points. And the devil's in the detail in contracts, and you don't want to somehow sentence yourself to a lifetime with a publisher, and it's in the details there, and you can end up, stuck with that publisher and make it very difficult to leave should you want to go on to a different publisher. So it's a two-step process, really. So don't agree to anything, and then start calling any agent you ever met or anybody with an agent to say, I have this offer. And then there's also the Authors Guild too. They're very helpful when it comes to contracts and terms and stuff.
And if you're a member of the Authors Guild, I believe their legal team will look at your contract for free.
Yes, yes.
Also, in terms of publishers, for those of you, this is specifically for mystery writers, but there's a wider application. There's an approved publisher list. So if you just search for Mystery Writers of America, which is the industry association, they have an approved publishers list. And you do not need to be a member to access that information. The list is of publishers large and small that have been vetted. There are academic publishers and small presses and so on. And so my point is, even if you're not writing mysteries, you will find publishers there who, yes, publish mysteries, but publish a wide array of other things. And what you know about them is that the Mystery Writers of America has deemed them not predatory. John, what do you think? Can I close this down now?
Yes, I believe so. We've had it up for a little while there.
All righty.
Okay. Let's see. Has becoming a best-selling author changed your relationships with acquiring editors?
Well, that's an interesting. I knew a lot of editors before when I was an editor. I was an acquisitions editor. I was one of these people for nearly 20 years. And so I know how they think because I sat on that side of the table for a long time. I will say that the day I made the USA Today bestsellers list, it was at Thriller Fest, which is a big conference for crime writers. And several acquisitions editors whom I knew because I was selling them crime fiction, my writers who wrote crime fiction, came up to me and said, we saw you made the list. And I didn't even know it yet. They knew it before I did. And they said, we saw you made the list. That's great. That really means something, And so I think that the fact that they went out of their way to congratulate me was really lovely. And I think that changed their minds a little bit. They're like, oh, okay. Because, they'd seen me as an acquisitions editor and an agent, but not necessarily as a writer, especially writing fiction and novels, because I had only written nonfiction before that. Yeah. Hopefully it means they think I can tell a good story because I should know what a good story is,
Okay. And someone asks, I'm wondering how important it is to have an established social media platform before searching for an agent.
Well, certainly you don't really need one for fiction so much. You're going to need one. And if you have one, it doesn't hurt. And right now it can help. That said, what matters is that there's an audience for your book, right? Which is why comps are so important. And if social
comps
media,
meaning comparables, everybody, right. And you probably want to put that in your query letter. Readers of X and Y are likely to enjoy my book, that kind of thing.
Right. Because that's how, when you're an acquisitions editor and you find a project you like, and you don't get to make the decision. Typically, you have to take it to a publishing board, which is made up of the publisher and editors and marketing people and bean counters and all kinds of people. And they decide, it's a group decision whether or not that project is acquired. And the editor has to take a profit and loss statement with them, right? And the profit and loss statement is supposed to prove that, yes, there's an audience for this book. And of course, they don't have any of your sales. They don't know what your sales of your books are because you haven't published any books. So they use comparable titles. And the idea is that these titles will appeal to your book will appeal to the same audience as these titles. So we're going to use these sales numbers to populate this P&L to prove there's an audience for your book and that people will buy your book. So it's important to know where you fall in your genre, who your book is like, the same kind of readers who would like X might like your book, and how you can parlay that into a deal right? To make a case that there is an audience for your book.
Okay. Let's see.
And we are going to stay for about 15 minutes. So those of you that have to leave now, we understand. We're so pleased so many of you are staying, and Paula has graciously agreed to answer questions until 2:15.
So about social media,
Good.
I guess I didn't really answer that question, social media. It's not that important in fiction. You'll have to have one. And if anything, again, whatever about your personal or professional life informs the work, you can use that on social media to start building an audience now. If you're writing nonfiction, you have to have a platform. Social media, all that's obligatory to sell nonfiction. But you can start, like I write dog mysteries, so I am not a selfie person. I'm not going to happen. So I just post pictures of the dogs and nature and Vermont and the setting and all that kind of thing. So you can find a way to use social media to build yourself an audience and a following who very well might be interested in buying your book once it comes out.
I'm just going to be a little contrarian here. For the first several of my books, which featured Josie Prescott, an antiques appraiser, I really focused very hard on the nonfiction elements of the book. I mean, I had an article in Yankee Magazine, which is known for antiques collectors, and so on. And what I discovered is that people who collect antiques generally have no interest in mysteries. I mean, it might be related, but it's not.
Yeah.
Those are different things.
Right. Yes. Well,
in other words, I don't know.
No, well, nobody really knows. That's the thing. So you just have to decide when it comes to social media, what platforms you can actually tolerate being part of, and what you'll actually do consistently. Pick one that you will actually enjoy and you will continue to do, because it's consistency that really matters.
And remember to present a professional image. No
Right.
lampshades on heads, and
No,
naked drunken revelry to a minimum.
Right. Stick to books and reading and and write subjects that relate to your work. Because it lives forever.
Okay, John, back to you.
Okay, someone wanted to know if you accept submissions from UK-based writers, Paula.
Absolutely. I have clients all over the world. So absolutely.
Okay. On the subject of comps, would it make sense to include those directly in the subject line to try to grab attention?
Well, what I do in my subject lines is I use comps in an X meets Y formula. Now, X meets Y is like a Hollywood thing. It kind of gives context to the story. So if I say Gaslight goes high tech, you have an idea of what that means, right? Or if I say Lord of the Rings meets the Wars of the Roses, that's Game of Thrones, because George R. R. Martin wrote a big epic fantasy like Lord of the Rings, but he based it on the historical Wars of the Roses. So if you can find a way to do that, I had a project that is now in print, doing very well. Hide in Place is called, by Amelia Neymark, one of my clients. And I pitched it as Lisa Gardner meets Mark Haddon. And that was because Mark Haddon wrote The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime about the boy with autism. And she is written as sort of Hide in Place is a sort of Lisa Gardner-esque suspense story about a mom with a son who has autism. So if you can find a way to do that, that's always a good thing to put in the subject line. And then weave into the query itself, this book is written in the tradition of blank and blank. Give at least two writers or stories that are similar to yours in terms of audience.
Okay. And someone wanted to know that in a query letter, should you include why you're the writer to write this book for a fiction book, or is that more geared towards nonfiction queries?
Well, it's obligatory in nonfiction queries, but in fiction too. So, for example, if you're a retired homicide detective and you've written a series about a police procedural, then that directly informs the work. So you want to say that, right? Same thing if you are a baker, like Louise Miller, right? She writes lovely women's fiction about, and there's always like recipes. It's good, stuff to eat about a baker. So that informs her work. So whatever informs your work, or if you have written a story about, say, what we talked about before, you have a story, and the character is a mother, and the child has autism, and you have a child with autism, and you're involved in those kinds of nonprofits. That informs the story. So whatever you do, professionally or personally in your life, me, I have dogs and I write about dogs. So, that informs the work. So that's important to put in there.
It adds verisimilitude. Still in the bio on my books, the publisher puts in that I once owned a rare bookstore.
Yeah, there you go.
Rare book and antique store. And it adds credibility somehow.
Absolutely. And it also gives readers that they may learn something. Readers like to learn something when they read.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of query letter length, did Paula mean that most queries should include 150 words for the story description plus the bio, or is there additional words available for the bio?
I would keep it under 200 words total. That includes Dear Paula, lovely to see you at Jane's webinar. Have a nice day. That sort of thing. Now, at our agency, when we ask to see queries, we usually ask to have the first 10 pages of the book itself cut and pasted into the body of the email. Don't send attachments. Nobody will open an attachment from someone they don't know. So don't even bother doing that. Don't send, oh, here, check my stories out on this link. No, we're not going to go to somewhere. We got a million things to do, So make sure when you check those agency websites, if they say to cut and paste the first 10 pages into the email, just go ahead and do that, because we don't necessarily hold a bad query against you. We know a lot of you can't write good queries because I just sell sales copy, but if there's something about it, we'll just drop down and read the reading itself, because ultimately the proof is in the reading, and we want to see what the story actually reads like.
Okay. Someone asks, what concrete steps should a nobody with no networking or an impressive related professional credential go about to get a mainstream genre novel such as a serial killer or spy novel published?
Well, the first thing you do is you join Mystery Writers of America, or ITW, or which is International Thriller Writers, or every possible organization.
Sisters in Crime is a great one too.
Yeah. Every genre. There's 2 historical fiction societies. Practically every genre has a genre association where you will make friends, like me and Jay, my favorite people, whom I met through Mystery Writers of America, years ago. So you'll make friends, you'll make friends who can help you, not just be your friends, but also can help you through the publishing process. And, you'll find out all these things that you need to know. And all of a sudden you'll become part of the community. And publishers really care that you're part of the writers community, because that means you can get blurbs. That means you know the ropes, how the business actually works, because you're part of the community. It's really important. So start there. Join an association. A lot of regions have, and states. There's regional, there's state, there's national. You don't even have to leave your house. You can join the online chapters of most of these organizations. They'll send you newsletters every month full of sales information and interviews with big writers, and all these things that will totally help you become part of the writing community.
And I want to add something, and then I'm going to slip in a question. Sisters in Crime has a group, an online group called the Guppies, which is the Great Unpublished. And that would be a sensible group to join to begin to get yourself up to speed. Paula, if someone self-publishes, does that ruin their prospects for traditional publishing going forward?
Well, it doesn't help unless you're like one of these, people who figure out the algorithm and sell a zillion copies. That said, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said absolutely. Now it's so many people self-publish now that it's less problematic, but it's still problematic. So what you all have to do is ask yourself, who do I want to be when I grow up? What writer do I want to be? Whose career would I like to emulate? And how did they get there? Right? And you have to be patient. You have to spend those 10,000 hours. You write those million words. You know, you have to do your due diligence as a writer, right? And then, and not be too impatient. It's a very difficult business, but it's an art, it's a craft, it's an art, and you have to do your time. That said, you can self-publish, but don't come to me or any agent and say, oh, it's my third book of a series. And, you know, I mean, unless that you've sold a zillion copies and the average self-published book sells 212 copies, not a zillion, right? Don't come to me with the third book in a series and say, I can't sell that, you know, write something new, something high concept. But, and there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, especially if you're doing it for legacy, whatever, that's great. But just know that it creates an obstacle where you may not have needed an obstacle, right? There are enough obstacles for debut authors. So it doesn't, but like I said, it's not as bad as it used to be. It's not, because so many people have done it now that it's not as hard to overcome. And I've actually signed a couple of self-published authors, but only ones who were so savvy about it. They really did it right. And so they're ready to make that jump. But I think if you asked either one of these clients of mine if they wish they'd waited, they would both say yes. So, you know, that again, there again, though, they won awards, they did all kinds of stuff with indie publishing that made it less problematic.
Thank you. John, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay, if you have an agent who requested and passed on an earlier manuscript, does it make sense to reference that interaction in a query on a new manuscript?
Well, usually an agent will tell you, you know, this didn't do it for me, but if you write anything else, I'd like to see it. Or, you know, this is close, but it's not quite there. If you revise and resubmit, I'll take a look. So usually they'll tell you. If not, I mean, why go back? I mean, it depends. I mean, if you can convince them that you've come a long way since, or that, you know, you're doing something differently. Otherwise, there's a million agents. Try somebody new.
Or they're not going to remember you from 5 years ago. And just, I would query again. I would not reference the past. Okay, there's 1 minute left, so we have time for one more.
Let's see. Okay, Paula, as an agent, how important to you is an author's bio? Have you been open to new writers? Let's see, how important is the bio? Let's see. Have you been open to new writers, and do you have any suggestions for creating a bio that will help you approach an agent?
Okay, well, I mean, basically, we want to get a sense of you as a person and as a professional, right? So we want to know where you live, and if you know if you have a family, and you know, did you go to school? Do you have any credits, writing credits at all? And it doesn't have to be in your genre or even fiction. It can be whatever it happens to be. It could be whatever, you know, like I have one client whose bio reads like, you know, I worked as a carny and I worked and I, you know, he just had a million different kinds of crazy jobs. And I thought, well, he's got stories to tell, right? So you want it to look like you've got stories to tell. And that you always mention that you know, part of a genre association, that you go, you know, all that kind of thing. That's all good too. Those are all things that show that you're part of the writing community and that you're doing everything you can, and that you've led an interesting life, and you're ready to write about it. So, I mean, I think it's important. This is a people business. This is a relationship like any other business, business of relationships. We want to work with people that we like and admire and enjoy, right? So you want a bio that sort of communicates that, who you are, and that's authentic, because one of the most important things in writing is authenticity, an authentic voice. So try to get that across.
Paula, I can't thank you enough. This has been such comprehensive, direct, clear advice, suggestions, insights. You're just a doll. You're a complete peach. I adore you.
Well, I adore you too. And thank you so much for having me.
And everybody, it's been a great pleasure spending this time with you. I'll see you in February. And until then, I hope you find great strength and solace from reading and writing. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.